Hello, everyone, and welcome to a short two-part series on creating your own instrument approaches into airports that don't have instrument approaches. Let me go ahead and start by saying this right away. Don't do this in the real world. You cannot do this in the real world. It is incredibly dangerous to do this in the real world. But for us over in Flight Simulator Land, we get some opportunities where we can kind of experiment with these things, and we're going to go ahead and do that today. So what we're going to do is we're going to invent an instrument approach that does not exist. And we're going to do one, basically a non-precision with the VOR, and we're going to do another one, which is going to be still a non-precision, but with global positioning system. Let's go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do today is we're sitting up here at Simsbury Airport. This is always puts a smile on my face for obvious reasons. And we're going to be flying into Plainville, Connecticut today. Now, in order to kind of visualize what we're going to be doing today, I'm actually going to borrow one of our classic tools here, a little nav map, so you can kind of see what's going on here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be basically cruising this little approach, and we're going to be landing here at Robertson. There are so many things we're going to need to know to get this correct. The first thing, of course, is we need to find a VOR that's going to be close enough pointing to this so that we can go ahead and roughly line up the runway. So, of course, for me, if I follow this downwards, we have that lovely highway. That doesn't help us very much. And there is a VOR station down here at Tweed, New Haven, which is a pretty hefty ride there. Actually, I'm not going to do the math quickly here. But if we were to grab out our handy-dandy measurement tool, that gives us 25 nautical miles. Now, you're saying, well, 25 nautical miles, that's close. Yeah, except for the fact that something but mountains along here. So that's definitely going to interfere with our ability to get down safely on the ground. Now, there's another option, of course, which is directly to the north of us, which is up here. This is a TACAN. This one's up at Barnes Air Force Base. And if I were to go ahead and try that one instead, let's see what that does for us. Well, that's actually basically perfect. It's runway 20, and we can also see here very clearly the fact that the magnetic is about 207, so we're only going to have about, I don't know, it's about 4 or 5 degrees off. And our distance here is also 27 nautical miles. Now, some of you will go, well, that's not going to be precise enough. Why don't, instead of doing a direct runway approach, you go ahead and try to use something that's at a different angle? Maybe we can use Hartford VOR. Now, the problem with Hartford VOR is, yeah, it's pretty darn close. It's only about 11.3 nautical miles. For those of you who can see here, we have nothing but mountains all in this region, which means when we dip behind it for our actual approach, we are no longer going to be able to actually pick up this VOR station. So did I mention this was dangerous yet? We could theoretically follow this VOR to Robertson and kind of descend through this mountain. Or the more safe thing to do would actually be to come all the way out to here, come from Plymouth, and actually descend until we get to, let's see here, that would be 11 nautical miles DME. And we just have to basically work out this angle that we'd have to fly down here in order to get ourselves down to the ground. That could be done if we were trying to get close enough to the airport. But for us, we're going to go ahead and take it the sketchy way, and we're going to actually use the VOR to the north of us. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the sucker. I don't, keep pushing that button. It's controlling this program. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and try it. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this. I'm going to go ahead and say this is add to my flight plan. We're going to go ahead and pick a user point. None of those are user points, whatever. And then we're going to go ahead and pick Robertson here because that's going to be my destination, which is going to give us an approach that looks like this. You can definitely see exactly why I chose to come out of Simsbury here. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is we have a lot of useful information. One thing we know is we need to be at a 271 magnetic there. We can go ahead and dial that in directly. We know that our frequency here, if I go up to the TACAN, is going to be, let's see, where I should be able to see it. Again, it's one of those nice things. There it is, 113.00. So let's go pop over here and program everything in and see what we can do. So we're going to go up to navigation radio first. We're going to swap. I'll pop that one, and we're going to go, let's see, nav 1, I'm sorry. And we're going to say 11300. Let's go ahead and do that. Of course, in the real world, we want to identify, but for the purposes of this, we're just going to kind of get everything else set up. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and crank this sucker open until we get our course that we need. If you remember a minute ago, it was a 271 was the course we're going to utilize. So in the real world is what they don't tell you is just how frustrating and challenging this is. Okay, there we go. That's nice. So that's good. So this is going to be our setup here. And it's going to be involved, especially because it's not 271. That makes no sense. It was actually 207. Nice going, like I said. Now, one thing you'll probably observe is the fact that even though we've selected that station and we're correctly tuned to it, we haven't detected it yet, which does not surprise me at all, because, again, we don't have some altitude here. So that's going to take care of our lateral information. This is going to be fairly useful to us. One thing I do want to do there is I'm going to flip that sucker on, and I'll make sure that's all visible and stuff like that. Of course, we can switch between these, and we can turn those different ones on. PFD, I do want DME. I desperately need to know this number, and you'll see why in a minute. Keep in mind we have a synthetic vision that's just going to make my life a little bit simpler as well. So now that we've got that down, we need to now figure out what our altitudes are going to be because we've got the lateral aspect out. So this is where things start to get challenging. We know, for example, that our destination here, if we actually expand this a little bit so you can see it, let's go ahead and grab that real quick. I wish this would be the number. We know it's 27 nautical miles away. So that means that when DME 27 hits, we should have our airfield. That actually works pretty well for us. So now all we have to do is we have to figure out what the magical angle is that we need to start descending. At what point in that DME are we going to do it? So let's go ahead and get ourselves a little notepad and work this out for ourselves. So we know our targets, our field elevation is 202 feet. So we know that we need a 3-degree glide path, 3-degree glide path to this point. The other thing that we know, which makes our lives a little bit simpler here, is we need to know what the minimums are going to be. We don't know. I'm already going to tell you they're going to be 1,200 feet. That's nice and easy. And we're also, of course, going to need what the DME is for all those different points. Because remember, we're inventing this as we go. So if we know that the target is going to be 27 nautical miles away, we need to figure out what 3 nautical miles away from that particular point is. Now, luckily for us, we know as a general rule of thumb that a 3-degree glide slope is about, this is one of the handy things, 318 feet per nautical mile. Not bad, huh? So we would know if we had a target that was 3 nm away, we know that would be 318 feet times 3. So if we do the math on that real quickly, 318 times 3 is going to be about 1,000 feet. So we know we need to be about 984 feet away from our target at a 3 mile. Now remember, it's not 3 miles away. It's going to be 27 minus 3, or 24 nautical miles, DME, in order to hit that 3 nautical mile point. So that's going to go ahead and get us a pretty groovy spot there. As a matter of fact, we can even calculate that. So if I were to grab this and I kind of drag it up here to 3 nautical miles, we know that our final approach fix that we're inventing here is going to be right here, right over these lakes. And we have to be at a specific altitude at that particular point to start a 3-mile, 3-degree descent there. So what are we going to do here? We know it's going to be at 24 DME. We know that we have to be 984 feet up. However, it's 984 feet above the field elevation. So if we know that the field elevation is 202 plus 984, that means we need to be at about 1,200 feet at DME 20. So I'm going to go ahead 1,200 feet at DME 24 from Bath. We know our minimums, of course, are going to be 1,200 feet. And you can immediately see the challenge that we're going to have here. So we need to make sure our VOR minimums are correct. I think 1,200 is a little low. Let's go see what we can find. My mistake. It's not 1,200 feet. It's actually 1,200 plus 300. So my minimums, in this case, are going to be 500 feet. Yes! We've got everything we need to know now. So we know that we're going to be approaching using this VOR. When we're at DME 24, we know we need to begin our descent. We know that our minimums today are going to be 500 feet, and we know that the airport itself is going to be 27 nautical miles away. Now, the cool thing is we're going to be coming in at 90, which gives us about 450 feet per minute as my descent. And of course, if we want to do the math on that real quick too, that's going to conveniently give us exactly a 2-minute approach. Woo! Okay, so did everybody study that? Excellent. Remember, this is not how these things are done. Let me go ahead and pull the sucker away, and then we'll look at our next set of problems, which is going to be not smacking into the ground. So we've got everything calculated. We know that we're going to be starting at 1,200 feet. We know that our minimums are going to be 500. We know that the DME is going to be what it is. We've got pretty much everything set up. However, we now need to figure out if we're actually going to hit any obstacles along the way. One of the great things that a little nav map actually does for us, which is awesome, is we can actually come down here and we can take a look at a 3-dimensional view. Now, if you notice here, my top of climb is right here. This is my top of descent. We need a little 3-mile point here, and it's going to be right there. So this is where my descent point is actually going to begin. And you can see we're actually critically in a position where we could crash and die right at this particular point. As a matter of fact, we're about 83 feet above the ground at this point. That's incredibly low. So that means if we're not even in our standard tolerances, we're going to smack into the ground before we actually get down to the ground. So that's just kind of one of those neat little problems that we have. I also like the fact they call the top of descent at 6.4. Our top of descent would actually be about right here. So the interesting thing is, even though it looks like we're going to smack, we're going to be a lot steeper. We're going to be basically in here where we actually start our descent. Then we're going to come down at that 3-degree one more time. Unfortunately, we can't change that here. But if we could, that's exactly how we would set that up. Wow. Are we all ready for this? I hope we're ready for this, because we're going to have to actually see if we're going to get away with this. All right, let's do it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to be desperate for information here, but we also have to absolutely take our time and make sure we get everything right. So this has been set correctly. Let's go ahead and pre-program everything else. Remember, there's going to be no emergency if we have a missed approach. We haven't picked the missed approach. We have to invent the missed approach, which for us is climb and take a right because the mountains are going to be on our left based on everything we were just looking at a moment ago. So let's go ahead and take our altitude selector. We're going to set it to our 1,200 feet. Oh my gosh, this is so wrong. So wrong. This should never be done. Let's go. Of course, what did I pick for this instead of something slow like the 172? Is I picked the Cirrus 22. And of course, the reason I picked the Cirrus 22 is because it's going to get us there in a hurry. Oh boy, this is so wrong. This is so wrong. So wrong. Also, that takeoff was pretty bad too. All right, don't touch anything. Just hold it. Hey, look at that. We've already got some information. Okay. Not gonna lie, I'm actually pretty nervous. I'm almost like not ready for this. This is going to be so challenging and take every bit of concentration that we have in order to pull this sucker off. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna climb up to our altitude of 1,200 feet, and we're gonna go ahead and center up some needles here. And again, we'll go ahead and use some tools here to go ahead and make our lives a little bit simpler. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab my heading assist, and I'm just gonna have that kind of nudge me just a little bit here. Again, the reason I'm using this is just to kind of eliminate a little bit of the scary stuff that's going to come up here. All right, so we need to go ahead and line ourselves up with that VOR. We're starting to catch it now. All right, looks pretty good to me. There's 1,200 feet. We're getting all the flashes. And we can actually switch on navigation hold. I don't actually recommend using nav hold with VORs. It's not very accurate. All right, so I don't want to go ripping here, so I'm going to take my time. I'll go ahead and get this all nice and set up. Yep, see what it's doing? See how it's being very, very aggressive? I'm actually going to. This is why I wish I had CWS. It's just a button. There we go. CWS, by the way, is control wheel steering and basically allows you to grab the wheel for a second there. Okay, let's begin. So we can see here our DME is at 16.9 nautical miles. We can see we are on our local our artificial localizer here. We also know we're at 1,200 feet. Everything is ready to go, except we're going about twice as fast as I want to be traveling right now. So when this number hits 24, we begin our descent at 500 feet per minute and 90 knots, remember? We're going to continue down to a minimum of 500 barometric. One of the things we can actually do if we wanted to. Why am I being silly here? Here we are. We can actually come in here and dial that in, which I think is one of the nice features here. Barometric, there's no radar. And we said, what was it, 500 feet, which is not too bad there. 500 feet would be 300 feet above 200 feet. Yep. Just like that. Enter, enter. All right, we're ready to go. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Just remember, relax. These flights are very interesting, and they're always super duper fun. So we're at 19 nautical miles here. We're right on our path. We know that everything's good. Our calculations are good. Our minimums are programmed. That's all we got to work from here. So again, in the real world, we would never, ever, ever do this. This is just a demonstration in how you can do it. And again, that's always kind of interesting. Just because you can does not mean you should, sort of a thing. So I'm looking at my time here, zipping up real quick. I'm actually going to speed up time just a little bit here, get us a little bit sooner. I'm actually going to really start backing the throttle out and get that a little bit slower. Coming way too fast here. Oh my gosh, I hate this. I hate this to death. Thank God for SVT. It makes this a lot safer. All right, 22.7, 22.8. Oh boy, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and slow down a little bit more there. So we're going to get our timer all ready to go now. So we're going to be timing. It's going to be 2 minutes. Boop, boop, boop. Get this. Oh, I don't want 20 minutes. I want 2 minutes. Thank you. And we're going to be timing down. I'm going to press this button real quick. Actually, I just press enter, I think, on this version. We're going to time down. Enter. Okay. There we go. We're ready. Okay. Deep breath, everybody. Deep breath. Let's do it. All right. Begin our descent. So now we need 90 knots, and we also need to get ourselves all ready for landing here. All right, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and hide my timer ref here. We're moving about 500 feet per minute and about 90 knots. Now, one of the things I did not do this morning, which I should have done, is I should have done some regular instrument approaches with this plane, just to make sure that everything works. Whoops. Oh, man, I'm so out of practice with this plane. Whoa. Without knowing the exact power settings for it, this is going to be sketchy. All right, we're a minute and a half into our approach here, about 90 knots. That's way too many feet per minute there. And we're still pretty much on the localizer. I'm doing this one by hand. Makes it nice and challenging, makes it kind of fun for us. We got 200 feet to go. Whoa. Okay, remember 27 nautical. Oh, I am everywhere. All right, let's go add a little bit of power there. We're getting a little slow. There we go. There we go. That's a little better. I have to make up for some of that 600 feet per minute business I was doing. Now, notice how non-precision this is. Basically, we're riding a VOR that's 25 nautical miles away. Everything has been completely developed ourselves. And now, of course, I've got about 120 feet to go before I have to decide whether or not we can safely get this plane down to the ground. Now, looking out the window, of course, I can see a very, very close, a little more. I can see out the window that there's a little bit of stuff going on. We might have been broken to the clouds, but hey, we're going to be principled. All right, are we landing? Uh-oh, where's our runway? So, of course, there it is, right there on our straight. Now, the interesting thing is, let me come out to the side, go ahead and add some power here, and then we'll go ahead and line ourselves up with our running. So, as you can see, despite our calculations, we are pretty darn inaccurate there. As a matter of fact, we went right into minimums there, and just like you saw in the example, we basically almost smacked ourselves directly where that tree was that I was mentioning a few moments ago. Meanwhile, our runway that we're supposed to hit, you can see, is a substantial amount of distance from the actual location. As a matter of fact, if I were to stomp on this just a little bit here, let's get ourselves going, you'll notice that my final distance from that was not precise enough. And unfortunately for us, our attempt at making our own version, while it will get us on the ground, you'll notice I'm hitting 27 nautical miles now, but I'm not anywhere near the runway. The initial DME calculation was incorrect. So even though everything else was actually pretty darn accurate, the fact that we had that much of a difference in DME reading compared to the actual DME was enough to put us 1.5 miles off the runway, even though everything we did as far as the approach goes was actually fairly accurate. So to give you an idea of how dangerous that would be in the real world, imagine if the minimums were down to 600 feet and they weren't 1,000 feet like they are now, where we'd never would have found that runway to begin with. Now that's cool. That's really, really cool. Now, some of you are probably going, well, that was an interesting exercise. Was it possible to do this with GPS? Will GPS make this any more accurate? As a matter of fact, some GPSs, by the way, have a mode on them that will automatically calculate vertical descent, even though it yells at you, please don't do this ever, kind of a thing like that. But that will be for another video that we're going to do next. But meanwhile, I'd like to put this thing down on the ground, and we're going to try to do it. The next video is we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use a GPS, which should give us better distance information than the DME, which right now is showing almost 29 nautical miles, to give you an idea of just how far off those particular values were from the values that we were attempting to utilize and calculate off of. Very interesting, though. Very, very interesting. And it just gives you an idea of just how much work goes into these. There we are. Enjoy.